Stop pretending. My dad snapped as I held onto the wall, struggling to breathe. My aunt rolled her eyes and said, "He's just acting out because he lost his job." I tried to respond, but my chest tightened and my legs gave out. Someone muttered, "Here we go again." Then the EMT walked in, checked my pulse, and shouted, "We need a stretcher now." And just like that, the room went from mocking to chaos. My name's Jake. I'm 33 now, but this story takes place just a few months after I turned 30, right around the time everything started slipping out from under me. I had just lost my job at a mid-sized marketing firm after a massive round of layoffs. No fault of my own. My numbers were solid. I'd even closed a major client 2 weeks before the axe fell. But that didn't matter. They were restructuring, and apparently, I wasn't essential. That I remember packing up my desk in silence, watching the HR rep pretend she was sorry. But the real mess didn't begin there. It started when I made the decision to move back into my dad's house. I didn't have much of a choice. My savings were thin, rent in the city was ridiculous, and job prospects were slow. My girlfriend had just broken up with me, said I was emotionally distant, while I was quietly drowning in stress. So, that was another door closed. I figured moving back home would be temporary. Just a couple of months. I'd stay in the basement, apply for jobs, get back on my feet. That was the plan. I didn't expect it to turn into a slow burn nightmare. Let me explain the family setup. My dad, Alan, is 62, a retired contractor who still acts like he's the only man alive who's ever done a hard day's work. The kind of guy who thinks a 101-degree fever just means you're soft. And then there's my Aunt Karen. Yes, that's actually her name, who lives 2 streets over and shows up uninvited at least 3 times a week. She's never held a real job, spent most of her life chasing pyramid schemes, and somehow still believes she's the smartest person in any room. Together, they're a smug, self-righteous echo chamber. And I was stupid enough to step right into IT first. It was little things, comments that felt like paper cuts. Small but constant. I'd come upstairs for coffee in the morning, and Dad would be watching the news. "Still in your pajamas?" "Huh?" He'd mutter without looking up. Or, if I mentioned a job interview, he'd chuckle. "Better not screw this one up." Karen wasn't much better. She'd show up with groceries, acting like she was saving the world, and say things like, "Jake, you could at least help carry these in. You're not doing much else." I bit my tongue. I told myself they were just stressed or old-fashioned. Maybe I needed to be patient. But it didn't stop. It wasn't just passive digs anymore. It was like they were building a case against me. Everything I did was wrong. If I cooked dinner, it was too spicy. If I went for a run, must be nice having that much free time. And the worst part? They fed off each other's disapproval. Like it was some kind of family sport that I tried to stay out of their way. I kept to the basement, headphones in, resume open, trying to stay productive. But I wasn't just dealing with unemployment. Something was happening to my body. It started as a tightness in my chest. Just a weird pressure like someone sitting on my ribs. Then shortness of breath, especially when I climbed the stairs. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe lack of sleep. Maybe anxiety. I didn't want to sound dramatic, but one afternoon, things shifted. I just gotten off the phone with a recruiter who basically ghosted me mid-call. I went upstairs for a glass of water, and Karen was already there at the kitchen table, stirring her tea like some Victorian villain. Dad was at the sink, fiddling with a wrench, pretending to fix something that hadn't worked in years. I reached for a glass. "Sleep well?" Karen asked, voice sweet as battery acid. "Yeah," I said flatly. "You know," she went on, "when your cousin Brian lost his job, he didn't just sit around moping. He started driving for Uber the next day. Didn't wait for the world to hand him something." Dad chimed in immediately. "Yep, Brian's a hustler. That kid doesn't make excuses." I wanted to tell them Brian didn't have a collapsed lung, but I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I couldn't breathe properly, and I felt like I was living in a fishbowl full of judgment. I smiled weakly and excused myself, pretending I had another interview. But as I went downstairs, my vision blurred for a second. Just a flicker of dizziness. It passed, but something told me to pay attention. Of course, telling my dad I didn't feel right was like telling a brick wall I needed sympathy. When I mentioned the chest tightness that night, he snorted. "Maybe try doing a few push-ups once in a while. You're 30, not 80. Karen added, "Probably just heartburn from all that spicy food you cook. Try Tums." I nodded and dropped it, even though the burning in my chest was getting worse. I didn't want to seem weak, not in that house. That weekend, my cousin Lindsay threw a birthday party for her toddler, and Dad insisted I go. Said it'd be good for me to get out. Karen offered to drive, which meant I was trapped in the front seat with her commentary the whole way there. "So," she said, turning down the radio, "any luck with the job hunt? Or are we still on vacation?" I stared out the window. I sent out a bunch of resumes. I said, "Got an interview next week." "That's what you said last week," Karen replied, her voice laced with amusement. "You know, Jake, not everything's about waiting for the perfect fit. Sometimes you just have to take what you can get." I didn't respond. There was no point. The party was fine, balloons, cupcakes, chaos, but I started feeling winded after carrying a folding table into the yard. It wasn't even heavy, just awkward. Still, by the time I crossed the grass, it felt like I'd run a marathon. I leaned against a fence, trying to catch my breath as my vision blurred again. Karen noticed. "Oh, for goodness sake," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. You act like you're dying." That hit harder than I expected. I looked at her, mouth open, but no words came out. The tightness in my chest flared, sharper this time. My fingertips tingled. I quietly excused myself and went to sit in the car until the party ended. No one asked where I went. The following week, things finally boiled over to it was a Tuesday afternoon. I was upstairs looking for a screwdriver. I'd offered to fix the loose railing on the back steps, hoping it might earn me a little goodwill. I was halfway up the stairs when the dizziness hit again. Hard. My chest clamped down like a vice. I stumbled, catching the wall with one hand. Karen was in the living room. Dad was watching TV. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a gasp. Dad turned, frowning. "Jake, what are you doing?" I couldn't answer. "Oh, come on," Karen said, waving a dismissive hand. "He's doing that thing again, acting like he's got some mysterious illness just because life didn't go his way." I looked at my dad, silently pleading. He frowned, annoyed. "Quit faking it," he snapped. "I'm not in the mood for this today." I was shaking now, legs weak, hands numb, breath catching in my throat like gravel. Someone muttered something under their breath, probably Karen, before everything blurred. Then came shouting. A neighbor's voice. A phone call. Sirens. The front door burst open. An EMT rushed in, took one look at me, grabbed my wrist, and shouted, "We need a stretcher now." And just like that, the entire room, my dad, my aunt, their judgment and mockery, collapsed into chaos. That was the moment everything changed. When I woke up, everything felt heavy, like I was underwater. The hospital lights buzzed faintly above me, and a steady beep echoed from somewhere near my ear. My chest burned with every breath. When I tried to move, something tugged at my arm tubes. For a second, I couldn't remember what had happened. Then all came back in waves. The stairs, the dizziness, my dad yelling, Karen's voice dripping with disdain that I turned my head slowly. There they were, sitting side by side in the corner of the room like they were waiting for a dentist appointment. My dad and Aunt Karen. Dad wore that same stony expression he always had when something inconvenienced him. Karen looked bored, scrolling through her phone. "Oh," she said, glancing up. "You're awake." Her tone wasn't relief. It was annoyance, like I'd interrupted her scrolling. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "They said you passed out. Dehydration or something." I didn't answer. My throat was dry, my head spinning. The nurse came in before I could speak. She smiled, the kind of tired smile only hospital staff can manage. "You're lucky, Mr. Miller," she said gently. "Your oxygen levels dropped pretty low. If the EMTs hadn't arrived when they did, it could have been serious. Your lung collapsed, likely a spontaneous pneumothorax." I blinked, trying to process it. "Collapse?" I croaked. She nodded. "Yes. It's rare, but it happens, sometimes due to genetic factors or stress. You need to take it easy for a while." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Karen raise an eyebrow. So it wasn't stress. The nurse gave her a look sharp enough to cut glass. "No, ma'am. It was a physical medical emergency, not something he imagined." I wish I could say my dad looked remorseful. Shocked even, but all I saw was discomfort, the kind you get when you've been caught doing something embarrassing in public. Well, he said after the nurse left, good thing you're all right. Maybe now you'll finally get some rest and stop overworking yourself. Overworking myself? I wanted to laugh, but it hurt too much. For the next 2 days, I stayed in that hospital room mostly alone. Dad and Karen stopped by once more, dropped off takeout, stayed 10 minutes, and left because the parking meter was running. Why cousin Brian came by, though. He actually looked concerned, which surprised me. We'd never been that close, but he'd heard through the family grapevine. Man, he said quietly, sitting by the bed. They didn't tell me it was this bad. I shrugged weakly. They probably think I'm being dramatic. Brian frowned. That's messed up. You literally couldn't breathe. Yeah, I said, managing a small smile. Guess that wasn't convincing enough. When I was finally discharged, the nurse gave me a long list of instructions. Rest, follow-up scans, no heavy lifting, avoid stress. I promised I would. But when I got back home, the air felt heavier than the hospital oxygen mask. Dad was in the living room, watching sports. Karen was there too, as always, eating chips like she owned the place. Well, look who's back, she said. Our miracle patient. I ignored her and went straight to the basement. I thought maybe after nearly dying, they'd treat me differently. They didn't. Within a week, everything was back to normal, or worse. Dad's daily jabs returned. Sitting around won't make you better. Real men bounce back faster. Karen chimed in. You're milking it, Jake. Everyone gets tired sometimes. One night, I overheard them through the vent. Karen, he's trying, Dad said. Trying, she scoffed. He's 30 and living in your basement. You're being used. Something inside me twisted. I wanted to yell, but what was the point? 2 weeks later was the breaking point. I had a doctor's appointment, and Dad promised to drive. When I came upstairs, the car was gone. No answer to my calls. At 6:15, Karen texted, Alan's helping me with something important. Reschedule. When they got back, I asked what was so important. Neighbor's fence fell, Karen said. Didn't want to bother you since you're still recovering. Dad wouldn't look at me. You could have called an Uber, he muttered. With what money? I snapped. You don't get it. I almost died, and you still treat me like I'm faking it. Karen stood. Watch your tone. You're living under his roof. Respect goes both ways, I said. She smirked. Try being responsible for once. I laughed bitterly. You've never worked a day in your life. Dad slammed the table. Enough. You don't talk to her that way. So, they're my family, I said quietly. You just don't treat me like it. He glared. Maybe when you start acting like a man, I will. I walked out. No jacket, just anger and cold air. When I came back, the door was locked. After a few minutes of knocking, Dad opened it, expression flat. Don't wake the neighbors. Come in, but lose the attitude. I went downstairs in silence. A few days later, things got eerily quiet. Then one morning, I found boxes stacked by the basement door and a note in Dad's handwriting. Jake, Karen's friend has a place you can rent. You'll need to be out by Friday. Time to stand on your own 2 feet. I stood there holding the note, my chest burning again. Not from illness, but betrayal. Upstairs, Karen sipped coffee beside Dad like she owned the place. You've been here too long, she said. You need a push. Dad stayed silent. It wasn't about space. It was about control. My pain didn't matter. That Friday, I packed quietly. Karen hovered, commenting on what I took. You'll thank us one day, she said as I loaded my car. I didn't answer. Something inside me hardened. They hadn't kicked me out. They'd given me the drive I'd lost. I spent 3 nights living in my car behind a 24-hour diner, pretending it was temporary. My last client ghosted me, and the pain in my chest returned. Rock bottom wasn't dramatic. It was hunger at 2 a.m. with a dying phone and no one to call. Eventually, I found a co-working cafe where I spent my days applying for jobs. One morning, a small tech startup in Portland messaged me about a design project. I took the call in the cafe's corner and gave it everything I had. 2 weeks later, the founder offered me a full-time remote job. I moved into a small studio, saw a doctor, and learned my lungs were healing. Slowly, so was I. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding.